Hi, in this presentation we are going to get introduced to some of the fundamental aspects of complex analysis. So we'll be touching upon the meaning of a function of a complex variable, and then we'll touch upon the meaning of differentiability of a function of a complex variable and analyticity as well. After that, we'll be getting introduced to something called the Cauchy-Riemann equations in both the Cartesian form and polar form. After which we'll be seeing as to what harmonic functions are and how we can use the Cauchy-Riemann equations to check whether a function is a harmonic conjugate of another function. And we are also going to see as to how to find the orthogonal trajectories of a family of curves using the concept of analytic functions. To begin with, what do we mean by a function of a complex variable? So, suppose we have w equal to f of z, where z is any complex number, then we say that this function w, which is f of z, is a function of a complex variable. This is very much similar to interpreting as to what a function of a real variable is. Say y equals f of x, where x is any real number as such. This is how the function of a real variable is defined, right? Exactly on the same lines, we define something called a function of a complex variable. And the one of the very important aspects as to one of the very important aspects that we have to look into when it comes to a function of a complex variable is that when we say z is a complex number, z itself is made up of two parts, obviously the real part and the imaginary part. Accordingly, if we have z as a complex variable, then z is made up of x and y, x being the real part and y being the imaginary part, where x and y both are real variables, right? So when we say z is a complex variable, z is written in the form of x plus iy, and x and y are real numbers or real variables to be specific. Here x is called the real part and y is called the imaginary part of the complex variable, right? So if z is made up of x and y as its real and imaginary parts, correspondingly when we have w equals f of z, accordingly w is also generally made up of a real part, say u, and an imaginary part, say v. And of course u and v are again real, because effectively u and v are functions of x and y. So because x and y are real, u and v are also going to be real as such, right? To understand this, we'll take up a very simple example. Say, suppose we have z equal to, suppose we have w equal to, say, z square, right? Then what will w be in terms of x and y? Because z is x plus iy, I can replace z by x plus iy and simplify this, and that will give me its real part as x square minus y square and its imaginary part as 2xy, right? What I have done is I have simply expanded this using the formula a plus b the whole square, and I have further substituted the value of I square by minus 1, because as we know I square is minus 1, where I is the complex number root of minus 1. So accordingly we have this to be x square minus y square plus I into 2xy. But because we take w as u plus iv, Correspondingly, we can understand u to be the real part of w, and that is going to be x square minus y square, and v would be the imaginary part, which is effectively 2 into xy, right? So if I have w to be z square, which is a particular example, then we have the corresponding real part of w to be u, which is x square minus y square, and the imaginary part of w to be v, that is equal to 2xy. Okay, so this is one example I want to discuss, that I want to give you. We'll take up another example to understand things in a much better way, right? So suppose we have w equals 1 by z, then what will happen? Of course, initially we will have to take z as x plus iy, and because we have a complex number in the denominator, we will multiply and divide by the conjugate of this complex number, and that, when simplified, will give us x divided by x square plus y square, correct? And if you are careful with your simplification, you will see that the imaginary part will have a minus sign, and that will be minus iy by x square plus y square. You can check this, right? So I skipped the simplification part of it. So once again, because w is u plus iv, in this example we have u to be x divided by x square plus y square, and v to be, here in this example we have v as minus y by x square plus y square. That is because you have a minus sign in the imaginary part, right? So here, if we have w equals 1 by z, then we see that u will turn out to be x by x square plus y square, and v will turn out to be minus y by x square plus y square, right? So in general, if we are given a function of a complex variable, it is always better to initially replace z by x plus iy and correspondingly find the real and imaginary parts of the complex function, effectively u and v. Of course, in not every function do we or will we be able to express u and v so easily, because suppose, for example, I have w equal to, say, z power n, where say n is a positive real number to be specific. Then if we try to replace z by x plus iy, then we have this to be x plus iy to the power n, and the simplification of this becomes very cumbersome. So at times, when it becomes very difficult for us to simplify w to get u and v using the substitution x plus iy, we would take the corresponding substitution in polar form as z equal to r e to the power I theta. I hope all of us know what these are, what r and theta are. So just to recall, let me tell you this. In polar form, we know that x is nothing but r into cos theta, and y is nothing but r into sin theta, right? So if you have x and y to be r cos theta and r sin theta, correspondingly r would be root of x square plus y square, and theta would be tan inverse of y by x, so that z, which is x plus iy, will effectively get simplified to, because x is r cos theta and y is r sin theta, we get an r common, and we are going to get this as cos theta plus I sin theta, which is effectively r into e to the power I theta. Okay, so at times when it becomes difficult for us to simplify w, if z is chosen as x plus iy, we tend to take z as r e to the power I theta, which might help us simplifying this in a much easier way. For example, in this, what will w get simplified to? So first of all, this is r to the power n e to the power I n theta. Okay, so this further can be rewritten as r to the power n into, as we know, e to the power I n theta is cos n theta plus I sin n theta. Correct? So accordingly, now if you consider w to be u plus iv, then u will turn out to be r to the power n into cos n theta, right? And v would be r to the power n into sin n theta. So as you can see, we might have to sometimes write z as r e to the power I theta so as to simplify and get u and v in an easier way. Okay, so depending on the function of consideration, we'll have to either take z as x plus iy or r e to the power I theta so that we get u and v in terms of either x and y or r and theta. Right? I hope you have got this point. So if you have got this, then we'll quickly move on to the next part. So generally, so if I go for the general conversion, if w equals f of z, then we have u, which is u of x comma y or u of r comma t. For typing, for me to type this easily, I've replaced theta by t. Okay, so u will be a function of x and y or function of r and theta, and v again would be a function of x and y or a function of r and t or in theta generally. Okay, and very importantly, what you have u and v as is that both are functions of real variables x and y or r and t. Okay, so given any function of a complex variable, remember that the initial step would always be to rewrite the given function in terms of x and y or in terms of r and theta, so that we get the corresponding real and imaginary parts of the complex function to be u and v, which are again in terms of x and y or r and theta. So this is always going to be the initial step to proceed further when we are dealing with a function of a complex variable. Yeah, now we'll move on to the next definition, which is about differentiability. So when do you say that a function f of z of a complex variable is differentiable? A function w equals f of z is said to be differentiable at z equals z naught if the limit of f of z minus f of z naught by z minus z naught as z approaches z naught exists and is unique. Now, what do you mean by this limit existing? As we know, when we are dealing with the limit of a complex function, because z is a complex variable, as told earlier, z is going to be x plus iy or r e power I theta. Correspondingly, when I take z naught, this is going to be a particular complex number at which we are checking the differentiability in this case. So z naught can be chosen as x naught plus iy naught. So correspondingly, this actually means that the limit of minus f of divided by, when I take z minus z naught, this will turn out to be x minus x naught plus I into y naught, right? And when z equals z naught, we have x plus I, which I'm going to supposed to approach x naught, supposed to exist, and obviously when I say exist, it is also supposed to be unique. So this limit is supposed to exist, and when you look at the expression, the whole expression except for I, everything else is in terms of a real variable and real number. So effectively, when you simplify this further, this will turn out to be the sum of two limits separated by an I. Okay, so two limits are supposed to exist, right? And also limit of real functions. However, they are not limit of functions of unique of one variable. Instead, there will be limits in terms of functions of two variables x and y. So only x and are unique. This limit will exist and is unique. And limit of minus f of z naught by z naught exists and is unique. As you are very well supposed to know, when you say x comma y approaching x naught comma y naught, because x and y are two variables, this limit will be for a limit of a function of two variables. And as we know, when you say x comma y approaching x naught comma y naught, we can have, see, when you say x naught comma y naught, it is a point in two-dimensional plane. Correct? So, when you say x comma y approaching x naught comma y naught, we see that x comma y can approach x naught comma y naught in infinitely many paths. Say for example, it could be simply a straight line in which x comma y can approach x naught comma y naught, or it could be made up of two straight lines through which x comma y can approach x naught comma y naught, or it could be another pair of straight lines through which x comma y can approach x naught comma y naught, or it could be another curve which will be like this, which again x comma y can approach x naught comma y naught, and so on. As you can see here, x comma y can approach x naught comma y naught in infinitely paths, through infinitely many paths. And because x comma y can approach x naught comma y naught through infinitely many paths, the limit can be evaluated along any of these paths. So for us, irrespective of the path in which x comma y approaches x naught comma y naught. This point is going to be very crucial. I repeat this once again for you to understand things in a much better way. When you are finding the limiting value of this function, this is unique. It means to say that the same irrespective of path which x comma y naught. That's what it means z approaches z naught. So because there are infinite paths through which x comma y can approach x naught comma y naught, the value of the limit is supposed to be the same irrespective of the path through which this point approaches x naught comma y naught. Right? So correspondingly, there are infinitely many limits that are supposed to be there, and if all such limits give you the same value, only then we say that the limit of this exists. Now this is very much different from what is going to happen when you have a single variable. When you have the function of a single variable, the only two limits that we are going to get would be the left hand limit and the right hand limit. So as long as the left hand limit and the right hand limit exist and are equal, the first variable will have the same value. But when it comes to a function of two variables, there are going to be infinitely many values through the paths. So as such, checking the this when it comes to a function of two or more variables becomes very, very cumbersome. And that is where we have something called the Cauchy-Riemann equations. Okay, I'll come to that a little later. So just before that, we are going to define another important aspect pertaining to functions of complex variables, which is about something called analyticity. Now, what do you mean by a function being analytic? We say that a function w equals f of z is said to be analytic at z equals z naught if it is differentiable at z equals z naught and in its neighborhood. Now, as you can see here, when you say differentiable, all that we need is that it is supposed to have this limit unique, right? So as long as this limit exists and is unique, we say that the function is differentiable at a point. But when it comes to analyticity at the point, we see that the function is supposed to be differentiable at z equals z naught and also in one of its neighborhood as such. So obviously analyticity is a stronger condition when compared to differentiability. And what do you mean by something being a stronger condition? That means that analytic functions are always going to be differentiable. Because for the function to be analytic, initially first of all it must be differentiable. And if it is differentiable, then it does not mean that it is always analytic. Converse is not true. So differentiable does not imply analytic, because even though the function is differentiable at a point, it may not be differentiable in any of its neighborhood. In such a case, the function fails to be analytic. But however, it automatically is differentiable at its neighborhood. We say that a function is analytic, then it automatically means that the function is also differentiable. Okay, this is a very important aspect pertaining to analyticity and differentiability. So once again, repeat the same statement: analyticity is going to be compared to differentiability. Right? Now, keeping this in mind, we move on to something which is very important for us to proceed further. We will discuss as to what Cauchy-Riemann equations are. Now, just before that, coming back to what I was saying about evaluating the limits, as told earlier, finding the limit of a complex function is going to be very cumbersome. It is because for the limit to be existing, the limit should be the same, it should be unique, irrespective of the path in which z approaches z naught and correspondingly x comma y approaches x naught comma y naught. So because of this, when you say that, or when you are supposed to claim that the limit exists, there are infinitely many paths of the limit, and only if the value of the limit is the same in all these infinitely many paths, then you should be able to claim that the limiting value exists. Correct? So checking whether the function is differentiable or analytic is going to be very difficult if you use the basic definition of analyticity or differentiability, and that is where we have the Cauchy-Riemann equations. So what are Cauchy-Riemann equations? Cauchy-Riemann equations give you necessary conditions for a function w equals f of z to be analytic. So now we'll see as to what exactly are these conditions and how we can use them to check analyticity and or differentiability of a function of a complex variable. Yeah. So before we talk about the Cauchy-Riemann equations, we have a very important theorem. This is probably the most important theorem when it comes to complex differentiation, I can say. So this theorem states as follows: the necessary and sufficient conditions for a function w equals f of z, which is equal to u of x comma y plus I into v of x comma y, to be differentiable and z equal to z naught, are that these two conditions hold. So this, as you can see, gives us the necessary and sufficient conditions for a function to be differentiable. As I told you just now, for a function to be differentiable, we are supposed to show that the limit f of z minus f of z naught by z minus z naught as z approaches z naught exists and is unique. And for that to be done, we will have to show that the limit is going to be the same irrespective of the path in which z approaches z naught, which is a very lengthy process, right? So instead of doing that, if we can know what this theorem states, we can easily verify whether the given function is differentiable or not. So what are the two conditions for the function to be differentiable? So suppose we are able to write f of z as u plus iv, where u and v are functions of x and y, then the conditions are that the first order partial derivatives of u and v are continuous at x equals x naught, comma y equals y naught, right? And what do you mean by this? First order partial derivatives being continuous at x equals x naught and y equals y naught. As you know, u and v are functions of x and y, and once they are functions of x and y, they are going to be real functions of x and y. So accordingly, their partial derivatives, which are dou u by dou x, dou u by dou y, dou v by dou x and dou v by dou y, are also functions of real functions of x and y. Correspondingly, we are supposed to have that these partial derivatives are continuous at x equals x naught and y equals y naught. Okay, this is going to be the first condition, and very importantly, the second condition will talk about what the CR equations are. So the second condition is that the Cauchy-Riemann equations, which are shortly known as the CR equations, hold. And what are the Cauchy-Riemann equations? They are given by these two. First of all, dou u by dou x should be equal to dou v by dou y. This is the first Cauchy-Riemann equation. And the second Cauchy-Riemann equation is that dou v by dou x equal to minus dou u by dou y. So the two equations, dou u by dou x equals to dou v by dou y and dou v by dou x equals minus dou u by dou y, put together are called the Cauchy-Riemann equations in Cartesian form, because we are dealing with u and v which are in terms of x and y. So these are the Cauchy-Riemann equations in Cartesian form. And as you can see, this theorem gives us the necessary and sufficient conditions for a function w equals f of z to be differentiable at z equals z naught. Yeah, as we have the CR equations in Cartesian form, which are given by dou u by dou x equals dou v by dou y and dou v by dou x equals minus dou v by dou y, we also have the corresponding CR equations in polar form, which essentially come from an equivalent result for function f of z equals u of r comma theta plus I into v of r comma theta to be differentiable at z equals z naught. So the equivalent theorem is stated as follows: the necessary and sufficient conditions for a function f of w equals f of z equals u of r comma theta plus I into v of r comma theta to be differentiable at z equals z naught are that. Again, we have two conditions. The first condition is very much similar to the previous condition. Here, instead of having dou u by dou x, dou u by dou y, dou v by dou x and dou v by dou y, we should have dou u by dou r, dou u by dou theta, dou v by dou r and dou v by dou theta to be continuous at z equals z naught. And the second condition will give us the CR equations instead of Cartesian form in polar form. And the corresponding equations are dou u by dou r equals 1 by r dou v by dou theta. So here we have to see that there is an extra term in the form 1 by r. So dou u by dou r equals 1 by r dou v by dou theta, and similarly dou v by dou r equals minus 1 by r dou u by dou theta. So these two equations together are called the CR equations in polar form. So depending on whether the given function w equals f of z is expressed in terms of u and v, wherein u and v are in terms of x and y or in terms of r and theta, the corresponding CR equations are chosen and are verified for the function to be analytic or differentiable. Here, even though the statement is for differentiability, the corresponding statement for analyticity can be done similarly. So instead of differentiable, if we say that the function is analytic at z equals z0, then we'll have to say that this has to happen not only at the point but also in its neighborhood. That is the only change that is going to happen. Except for that, everything else will remain the same. Right? So these two theorems, in fact both are actually the same theorem, will give us the necessary and sufficient conditions for the function to be differentiable or analytic at a particular point z equals z0. So in this theorem, if we assume the first condition to be true, because most of the functions that we deal with are going to be having their first order partial derivatives to be continuous. So because we are dealing with only such functions, we assume that the first condition is going to be true for all those functions. So because of which we'll have to verify only the second condition for the function to be differentiable and correspondingly analytic at z equals z0. So from now onwards, we will mainly concentrate on the Cauchy-Riemann equations, or shortly CR equations, to verify differentiability and correspondingly analyticity at a point z equals z0 or in a region R. Now what do you mean by differentiability or analyticity in a region R? When you say differentiable at a point, we are supposed to verify the differentiability only at that particular point. But when it comes to differentiability in a region, we are supposed to check for the differentiability of the function at every point in the region. Right? So if the function is differentiable at every point in the region, we say that the function is differentiable in the whole region as such. Correspondingly, if the function is analytic at every point in the region, then we say that the function is analytic in the region as such. Okay, so for us to check differentiability or analyticity at a point or in a region, we will from now on remember to verify only